So one of our clients has got an amazing property portfolio. He's up to his 11th one at the moment. Now, all we did was a very simple structure. Now his structure allows him to have an unlimited borrowing capacity. And the only thing that we did was these top 4 things that I want to share with you. So again, it can be possible. Unlimited borrowing capacity can be done right from the get-go, but you have to start right from the very, very start. And this is what we're going to do. Firstly, we had to get his mind right. He was constantly educated from family, from friends, etc., that interest rate played a part of servicing. I get it, interest rate does play part of servicing, and that would make complete sense. However, what's better than interest rates is actually based on structure. Your structure is going to make all the break all, right? Where certain properties are held in trusts or companies, as well as just personal names. The second thing that we did was we looked at the popularity of trust. Trust has effectively had quite a big statement at the moment, especially for investors. Prior to, was just actually used for asset protection. It wasn't actually used in means to use for borrowing capacity, etc. But now, a lot more people, especially property investors, to amass more property, they've effectively held property and that liability inside trust. So I'll kind of go through the mechanics of that. The mechanics of trust is actually fairly simple. First and foremost, there is 2 components. The trust, which effectively has a corporate trustee, and then the person, the human behind that, which is effectively called the guarantor or the sponsor. So you've got these 2 components, which is the trust, which is here, let's call it T, and then you've got here the human. So whenever you kind of buy inside a trust, you've always got these 2 components together, right? And a lot of people don't understand that the trust usually is a holding entity. And this human, effectively, that human is also used because he's the guarantor. There needs to be a heartbeat to the robot where the general income or the primary income is effectively used. Effectively, what ends up happening is there is no change outside of additional documents for the trust or the corporate trustee to go for a loan. A lot of people think that because a property is held in trust or because there's a corporate trustee, etc., that the lending landscape has actually changed. It's actually not that. So the interesting component regarding those movements is actually fairly simple. The borrowing entity is the trust. The guarantor for income is the person. And there's actually not that much timeline for that trust to be open because it's a holding entity. The good thing about that is all the next purchases behind that is because some lenders, if the first property was held in trust, will not take the liability into the secondary, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th purchase. In this situation, a client has an investment property and we wanted to buy another property, and this property is inside the trust component. To purchase this, there's actually not that much documents to use for the trust purchase. It's just a couple more documents like trust deed, corporate trustee, some ASIC search, but everything else is pretty similar. The first property you buy in trust, effectively the liability is, this liability will be used for here. So it will be the person's income, human's first property, that income there, if it's an investment property, income, as well as their liability, we'll take into account a liability. And then here is the new investment property and the rental income here, as well as its liability. So you can kind of see there, by opening up a trust, there's no real difference. The interesting things here is actually the second purchase. If, for example, let's say this purchase here, effectively what would happen, it would be the following. Now I'm going to do a different design here. I'm going to put this dash because I don't have any color. Here, it would still be the client's income and their first liability, which is this one here. Plus, it will also be this property purchases, rental income, and its liability. What you'll notice is here, we haven't actually taken into account the liability right in the middle. And that's the powerful thing with trust. If, for example, the bank allows it, the following purchases
doesn't actually take into account this liability. The only income, right, that you need to keep and to suffice is actually the original one.
As long as that can take care of itself, the property that can take care of itself and its liabilities, usually the bank are okay with it. At worst, they may ask for an accountant's letter saying that the liabilities and that's held in trust can take care of its own responsibilities. And that's how usually people amass multiple property portfolios, or effectively what's called an unlimited borrowing capacity.
If the client, right, had no property, and because the client had no property right from the get-go, and the first property was just held into trust, what you'll notice here is this actually will just happen. You've got the attachment here, no liabilities. The attachment here doesn't take into account this liability, and so on and so forth. And that is the powerful thing when it comes to trust structure, where these people have the manifestation that it's unlimited borrowing capacity. Now, theoretically, that makes sense, even though when you buy these investment properties, there still needs to be some contribution, right? But as long as this component is taking care of itself, and a lot of lenders will say that accept trust structure, a lot of lenders say, can this take care of its own liability? And if they say yes, at times they will not take this into account for the liability on subsequent purchases after that. How amazing is that?
We've also seen some terrible structures in trust where, for example, a property, cash flow property, and a low yielding property with big capital growth is in the same trust structure. That will definitely affect borrowing capacity because you have one high yielding property which will take care of its own liability, as I said before, but the capital growth property, which is usually a more expensive property with respect, has a low yielding one which actually then affects the borrowing capacity. So that is effectively how you start to collect multiple properties. Another case where some people go, well, I'm going to open up a trust now, but I've got 2 or 3 properties sitting outside the trust. Unfortunately, in that circumstance, even though you bought that in trust, a lot of the properties outside will be added as part of that liability. So your borrowing capacity is the same without the trust. So the best way to take advantage of effectively unlimited borrowing capacity is actually through a couple of things. Number one, restructure. That client that has 11 properties now, there was actually 2 or 3 properties that was sitting in his own personal name. If we kept that in his personal name, effectively what ends up happening is he can't do or grow. He was kind of maxed out. Now he wanted to keep some of those properties and offload some of those properties. If the one that he kept, because he wanted to put in trust, there was duty implied. So speak to your conveyancer and speak to your solicitor. If, for example, you wanted to change a property ownership from human, being yourself, back to a trust. So these are the kind of moving parts you need to understand in relation to this unlimited borrowing capacity. The third thing was obviously the restructure. So we had to restructure a couple of things to make sure that we could identify if it was something that he could do. And then the last one was definitely this, and it's something that I would tell everyone to do. Speak to your accountant. Make sure that your tax implications, as well as the cost of opening trust, because there's additional costs in relation to that, fulfills with the overall strategy for the property that you acquire or the overall goal that you want to achieve. What we're seeing a lot of people effectively do is watch these videos, and I'm thankful that you are watching these videos, implying it and actioning it themselves without the understanding of the accountant. And there is cost associated to these trusts. So super important the way to do that. There's other tips and tricks for unlimited borrowing capacity and what type of property you should do. That's probably for another video. But this video is just to show to you that yes, it is possible for this quote unquote unlimited borrowing capacity to happen, with a caveat that there is still some income needed from the guarantor or the human component behind it. The usual trust structure is usually the holding trust structure, right? So a lot of people do get confused in that, and that's the best way to maximize it. So don't worry too much about interest rate, especially if your aim is to collect multiple properties. The thing that you guys have to be focused on is your first, second, even third property. Set it up, structure it correctly, so then you can keep growing, multiply, and grow your property portfolio and kill it in the world and be all bougie and buy a Lambo. And that's what you need to do. So I will see you in the next video. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Please like, tickle, and subscribe that button. And yes, I'm wearing a suit today versus the other black shirts that I wear. I really appreciate you watching. I'll talk to you guys soon.